Troeggs here. Today we review a Pilsner and discuss beer styles. Hello and welcome to Beer and Conversation with Pigweed and Crowhill. Good evening, Pigweed.
Good evening, Crowhill.
Yeah, what's on your mind?
Well, it's a little chilly in here.
Yeah, it is, actually.
Not because it's wintertime.
No.
It's actually quite warm outside.
It was warm in my office all day today.
Yes.
My office being my daughter's old bedroom.
On the top floor.
Yeah, that's right.
And
yes.
here we are in the basement
Yes.
with this air conditioner running. Thankfully, it just shut off.
Yes.
And, you have to thank for this cold basement?
Let's see. How about chemistry?
Beer.
Beer. Okay. Why is that?
Well, you're about to find out.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Not only is beer responsible for civilization.
Yes.
It's responsible for refrigeration and air conditioning.
It's also responsible for making ugly girls look good.
We might put even that above those other above civilization, maybe.
Yeah.
All right. So, but we'll have one of the palest of pale beers.
Yes, it's very pale. Sunshine Pilsner.
So this is Troeggs from Pennsylvania,
Yeah.
and this is one of the early styles to take America by storm,
Yes.
which we'll get to.
Yes.
And so it's. If you're a Bud Miller Coors guy drinker, this when you say beer, you kind of just mean
This is what you mean. Yeah.
So
This is interesting. It's not. So the classic Pilsner is Pilsner Urquell, which is the Czech Pilsner.
yeah.
It's not as sharp and crisp as that, but it's kind of towards that. It's closer to that than you would get from a lot of American lagers.
Yes, and the hops are more pronounced than you're going to get in the BMC.
Yeah, and we're getting these are classic hops. Saaz and Hersbrucker are classic German hops. So yeah, it's a good flavor. It's got a touch of that corn sweetness to it, but it's got the good noble hop flavor to it. I like it.
Yeah, it's a good fishing beer.
Yeah,
A crisp
4.5%. It's not quite as crisp as some other Pilsners, but it's in the right category. I like it. It's got a slight sweetness to it.
and this crispiness. So it's a Pilsner.
Yeah.
All right, we're ready to get into the.
Yeah.
We're done
So
drinking?
let's get into it.
All right. It's good. There are only two. What would you say? Categories. What would you do? Like a phylogenous species? How does that
Yeah,
work?
kingdom, phylum, kingdom Animalia, phylum Chordata, class Mammalia, order Primates, family Hominidae, genus Homo, species Homo sapien, common name man. That's the way it goes. Learned that in ninth grade. So yeah. I mean, the main difference between types of beer is it is in a bottle or is it in a can.
Really, that's all.
That's what it is. That's what it is.
Because there actually are two, let's call them types, categories of beer.
Right.
And I remember a bar opened across the street, and this Greek family opened it, and the guy wasn't really, he was learning on the fly.
Yeah.
He's like, did you know that their beers are either a lager or an ale? And, somebody who's been drinking nothing but BMC for 25 years. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about.
That's right. What are you saying? I don't know.
So it was new information to him, and it might be new information to other people. So that's where the initial split comes from.
Yes.
And then there are multiple styles on both sides. This is like the the War of the Roses. The Lancasters and the Yorks.
There you go. Yeah, so, and what the split between an ale and a lager.
Let's just define this split.
Yeah, so it comes down to the type of yeast that's used. Now, sometimes people refer to it as top-fermenting and bottom-fermenting, but it really comes down to the style of yeast that's used to make an ale versus a lager, and also, along with that style of yeast, the temperature that it's fermented at.
This is going to be big, and this is going to relate to my little air conditioning story later in the broadcast.
Yes.
So here we have two one-word descriptions to define the two. You give me some ales. What do you have there?
So what do you mean? So you have stouts, porters?
No. Well, broadly speaking, the difference between an ale and a lager. An ale is...
So the ale, I can't even read that, right? What are we looking at here? Okay, yeah. So in terms of ales, they're more complex. They're more fruity. And lagers are more crisp. Is that what we're getting at?
Well, yeah, I was going to have you just read the definition, but
okay.
if you're having a hard time there.
Ales
are generally
like
more complex and fuller in body than lagers, but not always. They're usually maltier and more aromatic as well.
Okay, generally speaking,
lagers...
Yeah, lagers are generally lighter in body and more crisp than ales, but there are exceptions. The taste is usually clean, and they're better served very cold.
Okay, so
yeah.
In the very broad sense,
yes,
that's what you get. So...
and there are actually some misconceptions that we should clear up. A lot of people think that ale versus lager has to do with color.
You know, alcohol.
Yeah, right. They'll say that ales are darker than lagers, and it's really not true. Now, generally speaking, like this Pilsner is
you're not going to find many. I mean, you can get a pale ale.
You can make an ale.
It's not likely color. That you're gonna have that. So there's a little something to it, but not what you think.
But what really distinguishes the ale from the lager is the yeast, and you can make it dark or light, or strong or
all
weak.
Of you folk, right. And if you're a BMC guy and your idea of beer is that straw color beer, you're drinking a lager.
Yes.
And usually an American Pilsner.
Yes. Pilsner. Here's something for the audience: is Pilsner actually comes from Pilsen, Czechoslovakia.
Yes.
So it's kind of like the old champagne thing. People will say, it's not champagne unless it comes from the Champagne Valley in France, right? So some people will say it's not a Pilsner unless it comes from Pilsen, Czechoslovakia. Yeah. So in some cases, people will say an American-style Pilsner to get around that.
Yeah, because it's a proprietary thing.
Yeah.
It's not just like only the cool kids say champagne. Yeah. No, literally it has to be. Mm-hmm. You should call it sparkling wine. So let's just do. So as far as the lagers go, what other lagers? So. Lager and Pilsner are almost, in a way, synonymous.
Yes.
Ish.
Yes.
But
in
not
America,
only.
Least,
but
yes.
let's just do a few other lager options that you might have seen.
So there are dark lagers.
Yeah.
So there are dark lagers that are bocks. There are dark lagers that are there are some Munich beers. There are some Oktoberfest beers.
The Schwartz beer means black beer. So
that's
it's very dark.
And it's a lager.
It's a lager.
Yeah. So you can make all kinds of dark beers that are lagers.
Or yes.
A Dunkel is a dark lager.
A Doppelbock, if you wanted to go on a beer-only diet and...
you're bringing that back up.
Hate it. You could drink a Doppelbock. That's a lager, and it's very strong. So you think of light and low alcohol as lager, and that's mostly right. But your Doppelbock is an 8% dark beer, which is a lager.
Yes. So you can make a strong lager. You can make a dark lager. You can make a sweet lager. Mm-hmm. It's just a question of which yeast you're using to make it. Generally speaking, the lager yeasts are going to make things more crisp flavored than the ale yeast.
And having something to do. Now, before refrigeration, you just you had to dig a pit or go to put your kegs in a coal mine
in the cellar or something like that. Yeah,
right. So
you'd brew during the time of year when the temperatures were ideal, and you probably wouldn't brew in the summer because it's just too hot to brew. Yeah. So
and I think isn't the Octoberfest? You're drinking the rest of the beer. So you
brewed in March.
You brewed when it was cold because it needed to ferment in cold temperatures.
Yeah.
So you made enough to get you through the summer. Now it's kind of getting 6 months old, and you're drinking it before.
Now, before they had fermentation, what they had were ice caves. And what they would do is in the winter,
they had refrigeration.
Before that, what did I say?
Fermentation.
Oh, yeah. Before fermentation, we were chimpanzees. Okay.
We didn't have beer.
Exactly, we didn't have beer. Yeah. So before there was refrigeration, they would go out to the lakes in the wintertime and cut huge blocks of ice. and put them in caves and cover them with straw and that sort of thing so that they would have this ice to last for quite a long time. Right. And they would use that ice to cool things so that they could make lagers before we had refrigeration. Right. But once we had refrigeration, it meant that you could make lagers all year long.
Right. So that's the lagers. The ales you don't mess about with all of that. All of your British ales were brewed warm, frankly drank warm.
Yeah.
And so the BMC crowd, most of the beer that's getting drunk on any given Saturday and Sunday is a lager.
What do you mean when you're saying BMC?
Bud Miller Coors.
Okay. I'm the whole time I've been trying to think, what beer are you talking about, BMC?
So as far as quantity goes, you're mostly drinking these lagers.
They're American style pilsners. They're lagers. Yes. Yeah.
However, now if you go into the craft section of a case, and you're looking at the vast variety of beers, you're looking mostly at a variety of ales.
Often.
So there's more quantity of lager, but more available styles of ales.
I think that's probably true.
Fair enough.
I think that's fair. Because a lot of the different styles that you see, especially the ones that are popular nowadays, like IPAs and things.
Yeah, your pale ales, your IPAs, stouts, porters.
Yeah. Belgian beers, sours, other kinds of things. Now, some of them will span, like a wheat beer. A wheat beer, you could make a wheat ale or you could make a wheat lager. So it's not necessarily going to go that way.
There are ambers, Vienna lager, kind of maybe
brown ales. Like this,
across there.
I can't think of any brown lagers.
That's probably going to be.
So there's a brown ale. But a lot of the different categories, you're right, that there are probably more categories of ales than there are of lagers. I'm not positive about that.
Well, I'll tell you what. Yesterday, I ended up leaving the liquor store, and this is the one in the town center that has a nice variety of beers because they didn't have any. I wanted the Prima Pils from Victory. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Like a good example. They probably had Urquell, but I went through. I'm looking for anything that's a Pilsner only or a lager only. In the case.
Really?
Nothing.
Wow.
I ended up getting this 12-pack here of this Troeggs that had both a Pilsner and a lager that we're going to get to in a minute here.
Yeah.
So, yes. So
everything they have was ale.
Variety-wise, you're mostly, you go into a brewery.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully they'll have a Pils for you. But it might just be 100% ales. And people, and the other thing is, like ales are the dark ones, and like you said. So yes, you've got.
So I wanted to go through a couple of those levers here. Right? Ale versus lager is the big one, but then we've got dark versus light.
Yeah.
You can have dark lagers, you can have dark ales, you can have light lagers, you can have light ales. You have malty or sweet versus dry. Once again, you can do this. You can do it either way, right? You can have hoppy versus mild. And that can go both ways.
Yeah, well, although if you're into hoppy beers,
generally speaking, it's going to be
you're going to be pale ales and IPAs, and those are ales.
Although you can make a hoppy lager, it's just most people don't. It's just not the way it goes. And then strong versus weak. You can have a strong lager like a doppelbock. You can have a strong ale like an IPA or a double IPA.
My understanding is before Prohibition that strong Pilsners were not crazy. And somebody locally came out with like a 9% Pils. And it looked like that.
Wow.
And it was... But without the malts and without the heavy hops, that booze is right in your face.
Now, one thing I heard just recently, I was listening to a podcast on the history of beer. And this guy was making a comment about India Pale Ales.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stories about India Pale Ales, about how they were designed to go over to support the English who were stationed in India and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Yeah. And what he said was that the trip, sloshing around in the barrel on the ship all the way over there, remarkably changed the beer, and he tried it himself. Apparently,
Doing a lot of sloshing.
yeah, he took a India Pale Ale, put it in a wooden cask, transported it by ship to India. I mean, this guy, what a life this guy has, and he can do.
He didn't just try to simulate it in his basement.
Yeah, he has nothing better to do than to go on a 4-month trip by ship to India. He said once it got to India, it was almost more like champagne. That it had changed so much in character by being in the cask and shaken around in the ship. I found that kind of fascinating because
which is not really the character of what we think of.
No, when we think of India Pale Ales, we think of malty, hoppy, strong beers, and he was saying that his experience in transporting this thing over there, it wasn't like that at all. It had radically changed in character to be this sort of champagne-like thing, which I thought was kind of weird.
All right, well, let's get on to our tasting.
Okay, so what do we got here?
So the
Little Nader.
You don't pick up a can or bottle or look on the board or on the taps and say, "Sir, serve me an ale."
No,
because it's like, what do you mean? Do you want a stout? Do you want a pale ale? What do you want? Oh, I see. You want the style beneath the ale. Yes, because there's almost no such thing as a beer that has ale on it, because that's the category.
Yeah.
And you have styles beneath.
Yes.
Lager.
Yes.
You can
to some extent stand on its own.
But it's not. How can it be the category and the style?
It's weird. It is weird because you're right. Because as we said before, you can make a strong ale, you can make a strong lager. You can make a dark ale, you can make a dark lager. You can make a malty ale, you can make a malty lager. So why can't you say, if you're going to say, okay, here's a lager, there's some sort of an expectation.
What kind of lager? No, just lager. What do you mean?
And now I poured this.
Well, here we go. So
it looks nothing like what I expected.
This is Troeggs' version of
springtime lager.
A plain lager. Here's our straw-colored.
And here's
Pilsner.
This slightly orangish.
I mean, it's gorgeous in a sort of a coppery kind of a.
I didn't expect this at all.
I would, just looking at it, I would say that's like a Vienna lager.
Exactly.
Maybe, like leaning towards a...
When I saw just springtime lager on here, I expected a way less color. I expected much less color out of the beer than what we're getting here. What do you got for flavor?
Well,
I'm getting
malty.
some malt. I'm getting some malty aroma here.
Yeah. I'm getting less of those noble hops that you get from a Pils. And plenty of it's leaning towards a Vienna lager, which
if you poured me this glass and asked me what it was, I would not tell you it was a lager.
You would say a light ale?
I would say this was an ale.
Huh?
Because it's
you're not getting that sort of refreshing cleansing.
I'm not getting that clean, crisp
lager
kind of a feel. It's very interesting because it, in a way, it illustrates what we've been saying all along, which is that the difference between ales and lagers is it really just comes down to the yeast, and you can make it sweet, you can make it malty, you can make it dry, you can make it dark, you can make it whatever on either side, either ale or the lager. Right. And this lager is surprisingly malty and sweet, in my opinion.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I'm sort of bothered by calling then call it a sweet lager,
right? Or call it something.
Vienna lager. It's its own thing, but just lager. Lager can't be both the category and the subcategory.
It tastes almost like like a Maibach or something. It's
right. Yeah, we put it over here.
Which is in the lager category, but it doesn't just taste like when I hear somebody say it's a lager,
a Munich.
Maybe, yeah. When somebody just says it's a lager, what I expect is a Pilsner. That's what I expect.
Yes, if you're right. If you're not going to give it a subcategory, I ain't seeing it here anyway.
No,
if this is an accurate representation.
Yeah.
Now, before I get to refrigeration,
okay.
The colonies were British colonies.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure, as they struggled to find the proper ingredients,
Yeah.
they were making British ales.
Yes.
Then, after we won independence and we started letting a bunch of Germans in,
Yeah.
like in the middle of here between 1820 and 1900, 5 million German immigrants entered the United States, and by the mid-century, they brought their yeast and recipes for Bavarian lagers and pilsners.
Right.
And you may see if these names mean anything to you. How about Adolphus Busch
Yeah.
and his son-in-law Ebhard Anheuser?
Right.
And we've also had tons of Germans ended up in Milwaukee, and then you had the intense rivalry between Frederick Pabst and Joseph Schlitz.
Boy, those names seem a little bit familiar. It's kind of hard to place it.
So it's sort of captured the American
Yeah.
taste buds.
Yeah.
And really, the lager overtook the British ale.
Yeah. So what happened was the British ales, or what was going on before the Germans came over, was you had a lot of very flavorful, somewhat dark, not necessarily clear. Like sometimes there'd be a little bit of cloudiness to it.
Yeah.
And the lagers, on the other hand, were crystal clear.
Yeah.
They were light. They were very thirst quenching.
Yeah.
There was a different style. It was a different type of a beer, and apparently it just caught on. And everybody thought, this is like, wow, this is great. This is much more refreshing and much more suited to the American palate.
And they started putting into sort of thin them out and make them less thick on the tongue. They started adding things like rice and corn.
And supposedly that has to do with the type of barley that was being used.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. They tried to use American 6-row barley, and they're going, it's just doesn't taste like our stuff back home.
Yeah.
So they're using these adjuncts to get it closer to the German lager.
That's right. Yeah, so there's 2-row barley and there's 6-row barley, and trying to make an English, generally speaking, English ales are going to be the 2-row and lagers are going to be the 6-row, but that what they had to do is, in order to get it to taste like what they were used to in Bavaria and every place else, they had to add in rice and corn to mellow it, not to mellow it out, but to lighten it up a little bit.
To thin it out a little bit. And also, I think what we learned later on was that there's also a bit of a cost saver, too, putting rice and corn. But then you had that dreaded Prohibition come along.
Yes.
And
we lost so many breweries.
You lost so many breweries, and then the rice and corn on the other side started to become more and more of a staple.
Yeah.
And we ended up with our hams and just all of that. Just really
light lagers.
I think I saw one article that put the American low point at 1977 of the least number of breweries.
Oh.
It was a craft brewery article that it peaked or didn't peak. 1977. There was actually, after at this point, the light beer thing had started, and somebody, it might have been Miller, produced clear beer. Which I don't think it lasted more.
Sometime in the 80s, I don't remember exactly when, I went down to Busch Gardens in Tampa, Florida.
Yeah, right.
And they had.
You saw your first brewery tour?
They had a beer garden.
Yeah.
So I went.
Did you take the tour though? Did they make you do the tour before they give you some free beer?
No, they just had a beer garden. I didn't do any kind of a tour. I went into the beer garden, and I was expecting, Busch and Budweiser and just regular beer.
Yeah.
They actually had some very interesting beers.
What?
Which surprised me. I was like, here I am in Anheuser-Busch territory. They had some very interesting beers that I've never seen available commercially, that they had only in the beer garden at Busch Gardens.
They should, but I would never have given them that much credit.
I know, but it was fantastic.
That is
fantastic. It was actually very interesting.
All right, so that's why we drink more lagers than ales. That's the difference between lagers and ales.
Yes.
Thank your brewer for your air conditioning. So the point of that was, hold on, I kind of skimmed over that. Once the craze hit, then brewers are like, gosh, we've got to find a better way than ice blocks from the Great Lakes and digging big holes in the basement.
Yes.
And so they were really the ones that pushed the technology of refrigeration, which eventually gave us air conditioning, because they needed to cool the rooms down to brew this beer that Americans so badly needed.
So beer gave us cities and civilization.
Yes.
And beer also gave us air conditioning.
My goodness.
Is there anything else we can think? Maybe cans. I mean, did beer give us cans? I'm not
yes,
sure.
I think at least one of my 2 children are here because
of beer.
Yeah. So
there you go. Okay, that's it. All right. So here we are. If you're interested in brewing, you should probably start with an ale.
Yeah.
Because it's easier. You don't have to worry about temperatures.
Right.
But that's
right. Most home brewers brew ales just because controlling the temperature
is a pain in the rear.
Is a big
Yes.
deal.
Yeah.
And all right. Well,
There we go.
go beer.
There we go, beer. Thanks so much for listening to Beer and Conversation with Pigweed and Crowhill. Remember to visit us at pigweedandcrowhill.com or send us an email at pigweedshow@gmail.com.